Jody Hamilton, better known as Assassin Number 1, wasn't just a masked heel. He was the nightmare in a tag team costume. Behind the mask, Hamilton was pure business. No gimmicks, no selfies, just straight-up bitterness wrapped in black tights. He and Tom Renesto, as the Assassins, terrorized territories from Georgia to Florida. Fans didn't boo politely, they rioted. Security didn't escort him, they barely survived. But Hamilton's reputation wasn't only about fear in the ring. Backstage, he was a hardline old-school vet who demanded respect and got it, sometimes violently. Lazy trainees, ego-driven wrestlers, promoters with sticky fingers. He had zero patience for them. He ran the WCW Power Plant later and left a trail of tough love, lawsuits, and whispered horror stories. In this video, we're diving deep into Assassin Number 1's real-life grudges, his backstage disdain, and the people he openly disliked or hated. This isn't kayfabe. This is the man behind the mask, the venom, and the rage. Strap in. Jody Hamilton wasn't born Assassin Number 1. He earned it. Blood, sweat, and decades of bitter experience. Starting in the 1950s, Hamilton cut his teeth in Southern territories, learning the hard way that wrestling wasn't a game. It was survival, strategy, and occasionally bruised ribs. He wasn't flashy. He didn't sell merchandise with a smile. He sold fear, precision, and the kind of cold professionalism that made opponents rethink showing up. The Assassins, with Tom Renesto, became legendary. Fans hated them genuinely. Security didn't just escort Hamilton, they sometimes held him back from mobs that wanted his mask off, teeth included. Hamilton thrived in that chaos. Every riot, every thrown bottle, every catcall. It reinforced his philosophy. Fear is respect, and respect is currency in wrestling. Hamilton also had personal vendettas. He openly disliked Flair, clashed with Pedicino, and had zero patience for soft or entitled wrestlers. That wasn't kayfabe. It was a man who'd spent decades demanding excellence and precision. Hamilton once reportedly told a trainee who fainted, "Congratulations, you just discovered gravity and it doesn't care about your feelings." That sums him up. Ruthless, witty, terrifying, and impossible to ignore. By the end of his career, Jody Hamilton was more than a masked heel. He was a trainer, a mentor, a fearsome ring presence, and a legend whose story is inseparable from the real brutality of wrestling life. So let's get right into it. Ric Flair, the man who could talk a glass of water into boiling. But according to Jody Hamilton, he was more about strutting than listening. Hamilton didn't mince words, stating Flair wouldn't listen to anybody. That's not just a critique, that's a backstage roast. Hamilton despised Flair. Not "he didn't call me back on time" kind of despise. Full on, every word dripping with bile disdain. In his own words, Flair wouldn't listen to anybody. For an old-school worker like Hamilton, that was a cardinal sin. Flair strutted in, ego bigger than a tour bus, acting like he invented wrestling. Hamilton hated it. Flair didn't just ignore advice, he bulldozed through locker rooms like a rhinoceros on amphetamines. Hamilton had no patience for that. He saw Flair's behavior as lazy, self-important, and corrosive to locker room culture. Imagine telling a man who ran decades of territory and trained dozens of wrestlers that your robe is more important than your work ethic. Flair said yes to himself only. The disdain wasn't subtle. Sources at WCW's Power Plant noted Hamilton rolling his eyes during discussions about Flair, muttering to anyone who'd listen that Flair's ego made a bullhorn sound like a whisper. Not exactly subtle workplace banter. Hamilton's irritation had a practical side too. Flair's attitude disrupted training, promos, and shows. For a man who demanded discipline and respect, Flair's self-importance was poison, and Hamilton didn't hide it. He grumbled, mocked, and openly called out Flair's "I'm king" mentality whenever possible. Hamilton's dislike for Flair wasn't backstage gossip. It was documented, persistent, and venomous. Not hatred for life, but enough to make Flair think twice before ignoring an old-school vet's advice. Jody Hamilton ran the WCW Power Plant like it was a boot camp run by a hurricane in black tights. And most trainees? They didn't survive. Hamilton despised lazy wrestlers, whiners, and anyone who thought the Power Plant was a spa retreat. The failures were endless. He'd line them up, run drills, and watch the weak crumble. Some threw tantrums, some quit mid-session, and a few fainted on the mats like fainting goats. Hamilton reportedly muttered, "If you're gonna puke, puke in the shower, not my ring." His sarcasm was as relentless as his cardio sessions. African-American trainees faced a brutal double layer of scrutiny. Hamilton's documented racial bias turned his disgust into venom. Slurs and microaggressions flew like dropkicks. Some trainees were terrified to speak up. It wasn't just tough love, it was fear, discipline, and prejudice, all mixed together in a sweat-soaked nightmare. Even the survivors remembered it. Tony Carr, Pez Whatley, and others later described Hamilton's drills as painful but eye-opening, if you were lucky enough to survive, without getting verbally roasted into another dimension. Lazy, entitled, or soft trainees? Hamilton didn't hide his disdain. He made sure they knew he considered them disposable. Some trainees complained about bruises, and Hamilton supposedly replied, "These aren't bruises, they're participation trophies for life." Everyone laughed, no one fainted. Twice. Hamilton's legacy at the power plant? Brutal efficiency, bitter humor, and a generation of wrestlers who either toughened up or quit screaming. The failures? They were a lesson in survival. If you couldn't endure Hamilton's hell, wrestling wasn't for you, and he made sure you knew it. If you're enjoying watching Hamilton tear trainees apart with a grin, don't just sit there. Smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell. Stick around for more real backstage horror, venomous grudges, and brutal honesty. Survival tips optional, sarcasm guaranteed, just like Hamilton would want. Hamilton's disdain for Joe Pedicino was legendary backstage. This wasn't storyline, it was business, ego, and a bruised sense of ownership all rolled into one bitter feud. Hamilton accused Pedicino of poaching talent, particularly Jerry Blackwell, and he never let it slide. In his eyes, stealing a wrestler was worse than a cheap shot in the ring. It was a personal betrayal. Pedicino, sharp and opportunistic, loved the limelight. Hamilton? He believed respect and discipline mattered more than flash and promotion. When their paths crossed, sparks flew. Hamilton's locker room eye rolls and whispered insults were enough to make even the calmest producer uncomfortable. He reportedly muttered lines like, "If you're going to steal talent, at least learn to walk quietly," and left no doubt about his contempt. This wasn't petty, it was strategic. Hamilton had spent decades building a reputation, mentoring wrestlers, and running successful territories. Pedicino's grab-and-go style threatened the order Hamilton valued. Every handshake, every conversation became a test of patience and precision, and Hamilton rarely failed to win. Even other backstage personnel took note. Hamilton's reputation for spotting weak spots and holding grudges meant Pedicino had to constantly navigate his presence carefully. One wrong move, one sloppy negotiation, and Hamilton would make it painfully obvious he considered you a fool. By the end, Hamilton had cemented his dislike into legend. It wasn't rage for rage's sake, it was a calculated, relentless contempt for anyone he deemed disruptive or disrespectful. Pedicino's smooth charm couldn't hide the fact that, in Hamilton's world, discipline, respect, and fear always came first. Tom Renesto, known to fans as Assassin No. 2, was the shadow to Jody Hamilton's menace. On camera, they were the ultimate masked duo, terrifying, silent, and methodical. Backstage, the story was a little less polished. Renesto respected Hamilton's craft, but the partnership wasn't immune to tension. Hamilton controlled much of the in-ring psychology and match direction, leaving Renesto sometimes feeling boxed in. One source notes that during tours, Renesto tried improvising a few spots to mix things up, only to get the kind of sharp critique that would make lesser wrestlers rethink their career choices. It wasn't personal, one veteran recalled. He just hated sloppy work. You get the stink eye faster than a referee counts 3. Traveling the territory circuit added another layer of friction. Weeks on the road, endless arenas, and the physical toll of their stiff style meant tempers could flare. There were whispers of brief arguments over schedules, and who would handle certain spots in the ring. Renesto, while patient, sometimes bristled under Hamilton's rigid structure, but he never crossed the line into full-on hostility. Even with these short-term spats, their partnership endured because both knew the act outside the ring mattered as much as the spectacle inside. In the end, Assassin No. 2's legacy is tied to Hamilton's shadow, a masterful, disciplined team with just enough backstage friction to keep things interesting, but never enough to break the act. Jody Hamilton's life was a masterclass in contradictions. A feared wrestler in the ring, a ruthless trainer behind the curtain, and a promoter who could coldly mock a rival on live TV without breaking a sweat. From bruised trainees who learned pain was just a part of the curriculum to television wars with competitors like Joe Pedicino, Hamilton left a trail of discipline, disdain, and dark humor wherever he went. He didn't just shape wrestlers, he shaped the wrestling business itself with a hand as firm as his grip on the industry. Whether you admired him, feared him, or quietly nodded at his savage one-liners, Hamilton's influence is undeniable. The Power Plant may have broken a few egos, and the TV parodies might have bruised a few egos, but it all added up to a legacy that still echoes in the wrestling world today. No sugarcoating, no kayfabe. Just a man who knew how to get results, leave a mark, and occasionally make you wince while laughing. Like, subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss any tales of backstage chaos, ruthless trainers, and wrestling's most unforgiving personalities. Because if Hamilton taught us anything, it's that wrestling isn't for the faint of heart. Thanks for watching.